he's not saying don't be moved to help the homeless. Don't listen to your feelings. You can do all of that, and that's absolutely fine. He's just saying morality is something else. Okay, just because something isn't super, it doesn't mean it isn't good. There are countless good things, right? There's different under the category of good. There are different things. One thing is morality, another thing is something else. But it doesn't mean they're not good. Or advantageous or useful. That's a word the utilitarians would use. Useful. Okay, so an action done from a sense of duty is going to have moral worth. But the next thing he's going to say is that the morality of the action is going to be tantamount to the morality of the principle that determines the action. So in the silly example I gave, the obligation or duty that David has to rescue Reggie is perhaps the duty to follow the principle, never leave a soldier behind, never leave a fallen soldier behind. You see, when you have a sense of duty, when you understand that you have an obligation, you have a principle in mind. Maybe it's not clear to you, but there is a law or principle or rule that you are aware of in some way. So again, when David rescues Reggie, David has he grasps that he's got a duty, right? He's got an obligation to do what? To follow some principle. Now, if the principle is very moral, then the action is very moral. If the principle is to a degree moral, then the action is to a degree moral. So the degree of the morality hinges on or depends on the degree of the law you're following. And that's the second proposition of morality. An action done from duty derives its moral worth from the principle which determines it. There are many laws, codes, etc. But an action is as moral as the principle which guides it. Any given law will not make the action moral. I guess some principles are not as moral as others. Perhaps the ones that always hold have a high degree of morality, and the ones that usually hold have a lower degree of morality. For example, consider the principle, you must return what you borrow. You must return what you borrow. That's a good moral principle. So if you follow it, your action will be moral. How moral will it be? It's as moral as that principle. Well, how moral is that principle? Return what you borrowed. It's not that moral because it's not that perfect. For example, you shouldn't return weapons to a friend because your friend is now crazy. It's a good principle. Return what you borrowed because it's usually correct, right? 9 times out of 10, you should return what you borrowed. But if you borrowed weapons from a friend and now he's crazy, don't return what you borrowed, right? So yeah, so there are depending on the rationality of the application of the principle. The principle has its own moral degree. If it's widely applicable, then perhaps the principle has a high degree of morality. And in turn, your action is going to have a high degree of morality. But we see something here that's emerging, and that's that there are rules. Sometimes Kant is going to call these rules or principles maxims. You might see that word later on, maxim, M-A-X-I-M. It just means rule. Now, the thing is, why do you think that we have a sense? Why do we have a sense, an understanding that we must follow a principle? That's a good question, right? Why do we sense or grasp or cognize or understand that we must follow a particular principle? All of a sudden you have a principle in mind, a law, and you think, oh, I got to follow that. I must follow that. Why? Why must some human being or some... That's a utilitarian response, right? Utilitarian would say the consequences would be bad. Right? You got to follow that law, otherwise the consequences would be bad. The world would not be able to be sustained. Right? The world of human beings, really. Right? But Kant is not a utilitarian. Good answer, but that's not the answer that Kant would give. So again, why do I sense? Why do I grasp? I think, hey, I got to follow that principle. I have to act in accordance with that principle. Why is that? And this takes us to the third proposition of morality. To have a duty is to be required to act in a certain way out of respect for law. According to Kant, the human mind when it harbors or entertains, when it considers a moral law, the human mind respects it. It's not to say that we're going to follow the law. You could choose not to follow, but you do respect it. You do take it seriously. Right? Some of us sometimes are about to do something, and we ask ourselves, should I do this? Is it wrong? I'll do it anyway. But even if you choose to do something immoral, and we all do from time to time, even if you choose, you still acknowledge the force or the power that the correct principle has, because you do hesitate. And hopefully you respect the law so much that you follow it. You respect the moral principle so much that you don't violate it. You respect it, you follow it. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is in a nutshell. This next slide up here has everything. I like to do that to sum things up. So, a goodwill, something that is never to be forfeited, acts from a sense of duty, obligation.
Oh my God, bro, how the fuck are you dodging it?
It understands that it is obliged to follow a moral law or principle because the will respects it. Are there any questions so far? Whether we love Kant or hate him, we're understanding more or less. Okay. Lightning. Once again, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the slide you're looking at right now contains more or less everything. Next slide. Why would we respect the moral law? And Kant intuits, don't forget that to intuit in philosophy is to readily grasp, to immediately see. It means something like that. Why would we respect the moral law? According to Kant, Kant intuits that the force of a moral duty cannot be ignored, no matter the circumstances. It may be disobeyed, but its force is inevitably sensed. Are there any of you who can identify this, maybe from experience? Or is this something you don't relate to? Or can you relate to? Is it relatable, in other words? Yes, Gabriela.
Hello? Professor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Would that be when, let's say you're little and you wanted a candy and your mom says no and you still go and you steal the candy, but you know it's wrong to do so? Like the force of morality is still upon you and you feel like it's wrong and everything, but yet you still buy it.
Right. right? As you're stealing the candy, you're thinking about taking the candy, you still, there's something that's weighing on your mind, right? That's the force of the moral law, says Ken.
All right.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to this, I think. What is it to respect the moral law? It is to take it seriously, but what law will necessarily get our respect? So now this takes us to another project, right? Well, it's really, now he wants to identify the law. Which law is necessarily going to get our respect? Think of all the laws that there are, right? Think of all the laws that those idiots in Congress pass, right? Nobody cares about, right? Some people do, some people don't. People violate the tax law, right? Some people follow the tax law, some people don't. You know, think about the highway, you gotta go 55 miles an hour. I don't think I ever go 55. I always go faster. Don't tell the dean I said that. I can't help it. I can't drive at that speed. I can't. It's impossible. I'm sorry. I cannot. The lowest I'll go in a neighborhood is 30, 37, maybe in a neighborhood. I can't do it. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of myself.
Oh,
Not really. But anyways, look, there are lots of laws, right? Lots of laws. Gabriela, are you in a wind tunnel? Can you turn off your mic, Gabriela? I can do it too. Yeah, you're getting a lot of wind or something. Can you turn off? I'll turn it off for her. How do you do this?
I'm not like you.
I'm going to mute you, okay? Because you're very loud. Sorry. Mute all. All right. Sorry, Gabriela. Right, so there are lots of laws, right? Suppose you, I'm not a member of any country club. They would not have me. They don't allow people like me in a country club. You know what I mean? But my brother, you know, he's a little posh, right? He's at the country club. And at the country club, they say, you can't drink a beer while you're driving the golf cart. Who cares, right? Don't go over 10 miles an hour with the golf cart. Who cares? People don't care. So human beings usually don't respect the law, right? Human beings usually do not respect the law. But Kant is looking for a law that we will respect. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. Kant asks, what sort of law can that be? The conception of which must determine the will. Even without paying any regard to the effect expected from it. In order that this will may be called good absolutely and without qualification. Next slide. It cannot be any law. The laws of this city do not necessarily determine the will. The laws of the private club do not necessarily determine the will. Furthermore, people often disobey such laws on the grounds that they violate another more general law. Eureka! It seems that the correct moral law must be universal. the correct moral law must be a higher law. Makes complete sense. So look, Kant realizes people don't follow the laws from Tallahassee. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. People don't follow the laws from Washington, D.C. Sometimes they do, sometimes they do. You don't have to follow the laws of the United States of America. Let me repeat that. You do not have to follow the laws of any country. You can always leave. You don't have to follow the laws of the country you were born in. You can always leave unless you're in Venezuela or Cuba and you can't get out. In general, you can always leave. People don't respect the law, and usually people don't respect the law or a particular law from the city or Congress or what have you, because they believe that that law that Congressman Jones came up with or what have you violates a higher law, a more universal law. And at this point, Kant realizes that human beings have more respect for universal laws or higher laws than they do for the specific laws of the city or the specific laws of some country. People will follow the laws of the city if they are consistent with what people take to be the correct universal laws. The Romans will follow the laws of the emperor. They will respect those laws because they don't want to get crucified, but forget about that. After they ban crucifixion, they'll follow the laws just in case those laws jive with what people understand to be universal moral laws. As a matter of fact, my dear students, people respect universal moral law so much that they are willing to die defending them. For example, someone said, and it's up to you to look this up when you get a chance, give me liberty or give me death. This person believed in the existence of the law that all human beings should be free. And if you don't accept that, you can kill me. Give me death. So which moral law is necessarily going to get my respect? Which moral law is necessarily going to get the respect of the people? It's got to be a higher moral law, says Kant. And my dear students, there are people who believe that there are higher moral laws. Not only Kant. Maybe there aren't higher moral laws. It's just an illusion. That's possible too. But some people do believe, with good reason, that there are higher moral laws. Not only Kant. So here is a quote of such a man. The quote says, "A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God." Now, Kant isn't mentioning God, but there's still a similarity here. Both Kant and this gentleman believe that there are higher moral laws. He just calls them the law of God. Who do you think said this? Does anyone know who said this? No?
I know, I never said it. I'm so confused.
what this means is that the good laws are the laws that are consistent with the divine laws. Martin Luther King Jr. said that. So Martin Luther King Jr. and Immanuel Kant have their differences, right? Martin Luther King Jr. mentions God. He's a reverend, right? He's a man of the cloth. Kant doesn't mention God, but they both believe that the good laws that we pass here on earth, right, are reflections, instances, copies. Though inferior, they're images of superior moral laws that are universal. Someone else said this: there is an orderliness in the universe. There is an unalterable moral law that governs everything and every being that exists or lives. Someone else also believes in higher moral laws. What do you think this is? Anyone? Gandhi. So Kant understands that universal moral laws get our respect. Or anyways, if we are to look for a law that gets our respect necessarily, we must consider that it is a universal moral law. And in this paragraph right here, Kant discovers the universal moral law. He finally discovers the foundational moral principle. Kant writes, as I have deprived the will of every impulse which could arise to it from obedience to any law, there remains nothing but the universal conformity of its actions to law in general, which alone is to serve the will as a principle. That is, and here it comes, I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. This, what has been underlined there, is Kant's famous categorical imperative. This is the foundational moral law. This is the highest of the higher moral laws. I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. The law is called the categorical imperative. Why? Well, because first of all, it's categorical. There's no exception. You must always follow it. Right? Whereas you can, yeah, it is. Whereas you can leave the country and no longer follow its laws. You can do that. You cannot in any way avoid following this command. That's why it's categorical. As a human being, as a rational human being, Kant would emphasize, you must always follow this command. The word maxim there means rule. It means something like rule. So, what does it mean? It's a bit difficult to understand, right? Welcome to Kant, right? Um, what he's saying is that if you're about to do something, if you're about to act, and you cannot will the rule you're following to be universal, then you should refrain from acting. The word will there means, I put in the chat. Oh, but yeah, let me put it in the chat section. Actually, if I go to the chat section, then I'll just tell you. So, okay, so maxim there means rule, R-U-L-E. Will, it says I could also will. Will there means to rationally want. It's not like desire, right? I could desire food. I could desire Mike's Hard Lemonade. I do. Those are animal desires. We are animals, and we have desires. Don't confuse desire with what you will. To will, according to Kant, is to rationally want something. It has to make sense. So this is what he's saying. I shouldn't act. I shouldn't perform. I shouldn't carry out some action unless the principle I'm following is a principle that I could rationally want to be universal. For all. At this time, if you're understanding it, you might think that it's like the golden rule. This is nothing like the golden rule. Everyone misunderstands this initially. It's common. Again, this is the foundational law of morality. Don't ever do anything unless you could rationally want the law you're following in this particular instance to be a law for all. Could you rationally want the law you're following to be a law for all? Yes. Okay, then do whatever you want. Do what you were doing. Go ahead. Carry on. Hey, I cannot rationally want the principle I'm following to be universal. Then stop acting. Then don't act, rather. I'll put it in other words. My students sometimes tell me that I'm clearer than Kant. Anybody's clearer than Kant. In other words, act on that maxim. Act according to that rule. That could reasonably be a universal rule. The adverb reasonably is very important. The categorical imperative, in other words, again. So if you didn't understand Kant's original, you didn't understand this paraphrase, here's another paraphrase. In other words, again, act according to rule X, whatever the hell that rule is. If you could reasonably want that X should become a universal law. Is this making some sense, my dear students? Yeah. If you think he's saying do unto others as you would have them do unto you, you're wrong. He's not saying that, but you're understanding it. At least you're understanding. So suppose, I'll give you an example. Suppose that I'm about to, I'm talking to Megan, right? And I'm going to lie to her. Yeah, not nice. I'm going to lie to Megan Richards. Say, look, I know I'm leaving the country next week. I'm not coming back. I've had it. I'm out of here. Before I go, I'm going to get some money from you. I'm going to get some, hey, can I borrow some, can I borrow some money? Right? They don't know I'm leaving. So I go to Megan. I say, hey, Megan, can I borrow $10,000? And she asks me, are you going to pay me back? And I say, yeah, I swear. I promise. I promise, right? This hand, I promise. I don't know which hand it is. I'll pay you back. Sure. What am I doing there? I'm making a false promise in order to increase my wealth. I'm making a false promise in order to increase my wealth. Now, Kant, let's go back, right? Kant says that you are never to act otherwise than so that you could also will that your rule should become a universal rule. So as I'm lying to Megan, I think to myself, what am I doing? What's the rule that I'm following? What's the rule or maxim that I'm following? Make a false promise in order to increase your wealth. Could I rationally want this rule to be a universal rule? Well, the utilitarians would say, no way. There would be no contracts. There'd be theft everywhere. Fraud, rampant. But Kant doesn't give a damn about the consequences. It's different. Kant is asking, can you reasonably want this rule to be a universal rule? So, I think of myself, right, as writing. I imagine myself as someone who is writing down the laws for the world. Universal moral laws for humanity. I just imagine that. I got this big book, and it's called Universal Moral Laws. Could I insert among these laws the law steal from others? Make a false promise in order to increase my wealth? The answer is no. Why? Look, if make false promises were a universal rule, and it were announced, right? Hey, from now on, everyone can make false promises. If make false promises were a universal rule, then no one would believe anyone.
Yeah, so this is just not like prime advertising things, so they try to find anything.
Hey, Professor Marcella, Megan's thinking, right? Megan's thinking. Marcella wants to. He just made a promise, but he's allowed to make false promises now. It's a universal rule, right? So I don't trust him because if he wants to, he can make false promises. It's legal, and if he rips me off, I have no legal recourse because the law is that he can do it. So you know what Megan thinks? I'm not gonna give him the money. I'm not gonna give him the $10,000 because it's now legal to make a false promise. I would know before I spoke to Megan that she wouldn't believe me. Because I know that she knows that the universe, that now everyone can make false promises. It's legal. I would know that she wouldn't believe me. So, I wouldn't even make. It's okay. I understand. So, I wouldn't even make the false promise to Megan. Why would I? She's not going to believe me anyways. So there would be no false promises. So the law, make a false promise, would be about nothing. And that's why it's irrational. It's not because of the consequences. Oh, what a horrible world we would live in if people are always lying to one another. That's not it at all. That's not it at all. Can't this say, could you reasonably want make false promises to be universal rule? No. Why not? If make a false promise were allowed, if it were a universal rule, no one would trust anyone. Since no one would trust anyone, no one would even make the false promise. So there would be no false promises. So the law, make false promises, is a law about nothing. And that's ridiculous. Megan, did that make any sense?
Yes, I understood.
So, I'm not going to rip you off, don't worry. And you're not going to help me either. For example, my dear students, the moral agent, the goodwill, keeps his or her promise. Not because of an inclination, not because of the consequences. Okay, that's smart. But the moral agent keeps his promise or her promise because he cannot reasonably want to make a false promise in order to increase my wealth to become a universal rule. It makes no sense. Again, Kant is trying to connect morality to rationality. This is an irrational law. Make a false promise is an irrational law. When you try to universalize it, when you try to make it for all, you realize no one would trust anyone. And since no one would trust anyone, no one would even bother to make the false promise. So there would be no false promises. So the law is about nothing. But how could a law be about nothing? This makes no sense. It's irrational. So I cannot rationally will that to make a false promise in order to increase my wealth should become a universal rule. Again, imagine that you are writing the book of universal laws. could you rationally want to incorporate one ought to make a false promise into a system of universal legislation? No, it would be irrational. If one ought to make false promises, etc., were a universal rule, then, as I just said, then no one would believe anyone, so no one would even bother to make a false promise. So there would be no false promises. So the law make a false promise would be about nothing. This is absurd, so it cannot be willed. It cannot be rationally wanted. Kant is not saying that you should not follow this rule, because if you follow this rule, then bad things will happen. That's utilitarian. Kant says that if you are rational, the law simply cannot be enacted. I'm sorry if I repeat myself, but the law ought to be rejected, not because the consequences are bad, but because the law makes promises impossible, and in so doing, the law destroys itself. In other words, such a law is irrational from the get-go. Are there any questions? Is this making any sense? It helps me. Good, Nicole. I appreciate that. Think you can't make everybody happy. Some students get it in a second, and they say, man, he keeps repeating himself, going on and on, saying the same damn thing 15 times. And other students, you'll never make everyone happy. You know how it is. You know how it is. So now you understand the concrete example. Thank you. Now you understand with a concrete example what the categorical imperative means. Let's go back. Blame it on the rain. Wait, hold on. There it is. I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal will. I know what it means. Kant writes. Kant writes. So I don't need to be a very penetrating thinker to bring it about that my will is morally good. Inexperienced in how the world goes. Unable to prepare for all its contingencies. I need only to ask myself, can you will that your maxim become a universal law? Can you rationally want? Don't forget, will there means rationally want. If not, if you cannot rationally want it, if it makes no sense, the law must be rejected. Not because of any harm it might bring to anyone. I'm quoting here, not because of any harm. He doesn't give a damn about that stuff. But because there couldn't be a system of universal legislation that included it as one of its principles. And that is the kind of legislation that reason forces me to respect. Don't forget, Kant says that universal higher laws, a process of elimination, are the ones that get our respect. Make false promises fails the conceivability test. It fails because a contradiction arises. When you think about passing this law, you conceive of a world in which people can trust one another because there are promises, and cannot because there aren't promises. Thus, I have a perfect duty to follow, make a genuine promise. So you have a perfect duty to follow the contrary law. I'll give you another example. Suppose I'm trying to break into Gabriela's house. I'm gonna steal everything from Gabriela, right?
It's so fast.
I'm not gonna get caught. I'm good. I'm pretty stealthy, right? So, I broke in through the window, and now my gut is on the window sill, and my ass is hanging out in the air with my legs. My head and my torso are inside, right? My arms are inside the house. So half of my body is inside, right? Suspended as I'm balanced with my gut on the windowsill. I'm gonna steal everything. What am I doing? What am I doing? Kat says, I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal rule. Well, what maxim am I following? What rule am I following as I'm breaking into Gabriela's house? What rule am I following? Well, I think to myself as my gut is on the windowsill. Well, I am following the maxim or the rule, steal from others in order to increase your wealth. Steal from others. Yes, that is the rule that I'm following. It's steal from others in order to increase my wealth. Could I reasonably want this rule to be a universal rule? Could I make stealing from others legal for all? Well, if stealing is permitted, then you're allowing people to take other people's things. But if you're allowing people to take other people's things, they're not stealing. So the law is irrational. I'll say that again. If steal from others were a universal moral rule to be followed, then everyone would be allowed to steal. But if you're allowed to steal, you're not really stealing. Right? If you're allowed to take other people's things, right, you're not stealing. So the law is about stealing, but it's not really stealing. Doesn't make sense. Yeah, at first you think, intelligent people, everyone thinks, oh, Kat's going to say you can't follow that rule because if it were universal, the consequences would be catastrophic. Right? Oh, Kat is saying do unto others as you would have them do unto you. No, it sounds like that. He's saying something completely different. He's asking you to analyze a universalized rule, right? And in the case of the immoral ones, to grasp that they are absurd. Another example. Suppose that A is about to steal from B. I got my windowsill. I got my gut on Gabriela's windowsill. Which maxim am I following as I plan to take all her things? I'm following the maxim or the rule, steal from others in order to increase your wealth. Now, what is the categorical imperative? What does that say? It says, I am never to act otherwise than so that I can also will rationally want my maxim to become a universal rule. Can A, who is planning to steal, reasonably want everyone should steal in order to increase their wealth to be a universal law? Can A reasonably want this to be universally legislated? No, it does not pass the conceivability test. It's inconceivable. It's ridiculous. If A makes this a law, then he is allowing others to take things from him. And this means that they would not be stealing. And he's allowing others to take things from others too, and they would not be stealing. But they would be stealing according to the law. A contradiction arises again. The law says there's stealing going on, but if you really think about it, it isn't stealing. So again, irrational. Kant is not linking morality to the consequence. Kant is linking it to reason. And be very careful with YouTube. As I told you, there's a guy there with a big beard and countless old books behind him who's teaching Kant as if Kant were a utilitarian. Be careful. Kant doesn't care about the consequences. Both, Egon, both. Usually I'll put the incomprehensible Kant text, and then I put it in my words. But do you have any questions now? Is it making some sense? Egon? Natalia says no. No questions. Okay. Yeah, you got to really think about it. With Kant, you got to meet him halfway. So the law, everyone should steal, must be rejected because it cannot be universalized. It cannot be universalized because as we attempt to universalize it, we notice that an absurdity arises. So let me So basically he's saying this. I like Kant because it's difficult to figure out. You know what I mean? I like those. I also read Heidegger. Heidegger is also incomprehensible. I love that stuff because you got to sit down and turn your phone off and really start using the gray matter.
What's the gray matter?
The supreme
Why does he call it the gray matter?
moral law.
That's what I'm assuming it is.
The foundational.
I found a lot.
Right? This is what we have so far. The supreme moral law, the foundational law of morality is the categorical imperative. And I'll put it, hold on. I am never to act otherwise than so that I can also will my maximum to become a universal law or rule, whatever. Oops. I am never to act otherwise than so that I can also will my maximum to become a universal law. Now, in brackets, I'm going to put words that are going to help you out, okay? It's called a scolion. A scolion is a kind of clarification that comes in brackets. Who am I? So will means rationally want. It's okay. It happens. Happened to me earlier. But it happens to me once in a while. I got students that are dropping, leaving, coming, intermittently. And not only in one session. But anyways. Blame it on the rain. Okay, the rule that I'm following. You cannot rationally want people to listen to Milli Vanilli, right? Okay, this is remember them? Also, Natalia, this may help you. It's okay. If it's today, I understand. If it's today, I understand because it happened to me. That's not right, right? But they're allowed. So can I rationally want steal from others to be a universal law? No. If you may steal or steal from others becomes a universal law, then everyone would be allowed to take others' things. If they are allowed, then they are not stealing. So then what the hell is the law about? Right? This is ridiculous.
Oh my god. Why am I acting full? There's no way I did that, bro. Okay, I'm sorry for the argument, but like, bro. Hey, I won't mistake it. Yeah, I'm gonna drink this big one.
Let's do that correctly. Fine. I'll give you a minute to look this over. I'll be back.
This is like the new tank of the season, bro. I always have something. It's always something with me, bro. I'm just gonna find wolves in like, yeah. Yeah. I love it. Okay, alright. Who's that? Purple. Oh. It's so good, bro. Yeah, you gotta run to your foot. I let you do this. Just let me know.
Natalia, does that help? Good. See, Natalia, she finally put the cannabis down and started to focus and concentrate. I mean, the canvas. She's an angel, yeah, whatever. Not what I heard. My dear students, Kant is difficult, it's challenging, but again, I want to emphasize this is the clearest you're ever gonna hear it. Okay, you're ever gonna hear it, believe it or not. So pay very close attention. And don't forget, he's gonna show up again. The next thing he says, which is really interesting, I think.
Oh my goodness, bro. That was so clean. Oh shoot, another.
Yeah, you gotta make an effort.
What the?
Look, when I first read it, I had to say, what? At first I thought, oh, he's going to say you can't want that to be universal because it would be bad for everyone. The world would explode or something.
I know.
Everyone thinks that's where he's going. Everyone thinks that's where he's going. But he ain't. Yeah. Not only Kant, when you start, the more you advance in your studies, dear students, the more you advance in your studies, the more you're going to realize that the speed reading thing,
Well, how are you alive?
It doesn't apply. If you don't turn off your cell phone and look at the things, right? Tell your friends to get lost, you're not going to understand anything. Initially, everything's easy, high school or something. Where am I? But then the more you read, plus a lot of these guys don't make an effort. They don't care if you understand them or not.
Bro, oh my god. I know, that's what I'm saying, bro. I could have popped it.
If you get it, good. If you don't, so they're not they're not novelists.
I was like about to pop it, bro.
Some of them are very. Hume was a great writer, but Schopenhauer too. Schopenhauer and Hume are very accessible.
Oh god, bro, that's so annoying.
The Germans, Schopenhauer is the only clear German. Arthur Schopenhauer is the only clear German. He writes as if he were an Englishman. But the Germans are notorious for their. They think differently. The Germans don't think the way we think. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. If you look at the way they write, you realize their thoughts are not arranged. There are differences between American way of thinking, English way of thinking, German way of thinking.
Oh my goodness, bro! I just realized that.
In Argentina, we don't think, so there are differences.
That was the only reason I thought that.
Okay, so let me go back for a second. Kant believes.
Are you kidding me? I literally bought the class.
Kant then realizes, look,
I barely played.
I'm going to apply the categorical imperative. Every time I'm thinking of doing something, I'm going to ask myself,
The wolf is actually broken.
what's the law that I'm about to follow? Can it be universalized, right?
I'm gonna keep on landing at that place, like, keep on finding wolf.
And I'm going to only follow those laws or rules that can be universalized. Not because of the consequences, but because they don't entail a contradiction. Because they're not ridiculous. I'll follow those laws. I'll follow the sound laws, if you will. The laws that don't lead to contradictions or rational problems. I'll follow those laws. What Kant realizes that if he starts to do this, he's going to wind up respecting people. Right? If you do this, you're not going to steal because stealing is irrational. Well, since you don't steal, it turns out you're respecting other people's property. Hey, I'm not going to make a false promise. Why? Because it's irrational. Okay, that's cool, but you know what? If you keep acting in this way, if you keep your promises, because it is rational, you're going to see that you'll be respecting people. So he thinks that if you apply the categorical imperative to everyday life, and you follow those rules that can be universalized, and you reject those rules that cannot be universalized because they're absurd, then you're going to see that in the day-to-day, you're going to be respecting people.
You just got me a dating
as a consequence.
I keep on thinking this date, like, I'm trying to climb the wall with this, like, I have to make sure.
And because of this, he gives us the humanity formula. He thinks that when you respect people, which is what you will be doing if you are Kantian, you're going to be treating people not as instruments, not as tools, not as means. You're not going to be using people, you'll be respecting them. You're going to treat them as ends, as something that has its own value. So he thinks that the humanity formula of the categorical imperative just follows. It just follows from the application of the categorical imperative. You'll be treating humanity as an end and never merely as a means. Yeah, you know, I didn't make a false promise to Megan. Oh, then you respected her. Hey, you know, I didn't steal from Gabriela. Oh, then you respected her. And when you respect people,
I can't even like launch myself over there.
You see their own worth. You see them, not something beyond them, but them. the individual in front of you, you see that person, right, as something that has its own intrinsic value. That's respect. Right? So Kant now tells us, treat humanity as an end and never merely as a means. You can treat your car as a means. It's a means to some destination. But you shouldn't treat people merely as means. He's saying sometimes you can. You can use people sometimes. Right? You can use people some. Suppose some guy got a big beer belly, weighs 400 pounds, and his girlfriend weighs 110 pounds. And she sleeps on his belly. She uses his belly as a pillow. She's using him, right?
I love this chakra, bro.
But she also respects him. She should also respect him when she wakes up. She should treat him with respect, right? So you can use people. That's why he says, treat humanity as an end and never merely as a mean. He's not saying don't ever treat people as a mean. You could, as long as that's not all you do. I could use you, you could use me. That's fine, as long as that's not all we do. I'll put that on the board.
I'm so confused with the two-shot chakra, but you saw it for yourself. I like track these kids so hard. Like I jump and I just track them with the shotgun. I just like absolutely annihilate their health one. This is the best shotgun I think I've like faced with real fun. They get like annihilated by come on.
Apply. If you follow, the categorical imperative. Regularly. If you follow the categorical imperative regularly, then you will wind up respecting people. This is clear that the PowerPoint was a little. This is better. Can't believe that if you follow the categorical people respect. What is it to respect people? It is to treat them as a means, as an end.
Are you gonna carry these? Oh, ball's running, bro. Bro, if that a ball, he came, I like absolutely shot him the life out of him again, and then he just ran. A little ball. Look at this satisfaction from the question. You can't get up here? The face I'm gonna just stop. Notice
that we can do moral philosophy, we can do ethics without mentioning God or talking about God, right? Aristotle did it. Hume does it. The utilitarians, Kant.
Wait, there's another. Do you still have some meat? I'll give you a metric, bro.
And I think it's interesting to say here that even though God is not a part of Kant's philosophy, Kant doesn't have a problem with people having faith. You see, Kant believes that we are wired. We are wired to lead or live or exist in space and time. Purely human dimension. We are limited to a spatial temporal reality. We are finite. We are stupid, right? In a nutshell, Kant doesn't believe that we have the capacity, the rational capacity, to coherently think about God or a God or something like that. Right? Doesn't think so. Human beings, according to Kant, should not be rationally thinking about God. Not because God doesn't exist, it's just beyond our scope of comprehension. Right? He's not saying he's going to say don't. Use your intellect for math, right? Use your intellect for science, use your intellect. But don't use your intellect to understand God. God has no place in critical thinking. Not because there is no God. It's just human beings are not equipped to understand such a thing. Suppose for some reason someone's cell phone gets into a time machine and the cell phone shows up 300 years ago and the pirate gets the cell phone. The pirate's never going to know what the hell the cell phone is. Yet, it was made by human beings who lived only 200 or 300 years after him. And we have the audacity to try to understand God. If we can't even understand human beings, right, 100 years down the pike, human beings can't understand human beings. Sometimes we live at the same time. You may have some human being who cannot understand a genius, right? It's a contemporary. A Viking is not going to understand what a cell phone is, even though this was made by human beings just a couple of 100 years afterwards. And yet we think we can understand God, who's infinite. Kant says, look, if you want to think about God, if you want to believe in God, that's fine. But he's not against it. He's just saying that he thinks that the channel or conduit should be faith. Right? That's all he says. So in a sense, he respects faith. In a way, he's not an atheist, maybe an agnostic, but he's open-minded. I'm gonna say don't think about it because you're just not equipped to understand it. You're not equipped to understand the human beings of the year 2400. None of us today will be able to understand, right, the human beings of the year 2400. So don't have the audacity to try to apply your limited mind to understanding or making judgments about the divine. I think that's very interesting. I think it makes sense. And that's why there is such a thing as faith that some people have, which Kant has no problem with.
Run.
Okay, I think I've bored you long enough. There are a few more things about Kant, but I will tell you next time. There's a lot to him. I look forward to boring you again on Tuesday. And enjoy the rain. You've learned a lot. You've learned a lot. I'll dedicate the last. You too, Denise. I'll dedicate the last 20 minutes to any questions that you may have.